Welcome everybody to the 311 Griffin's YouTube channel. 2 years ago, after I watched The Force Awakens, I made a video about my theory regarding Rey's origin from The Force Awakens. If you haven't watched Rise of Skywalker yet, there are going to be spoilers in this video, so you might want to stop watching now. I'll reference my old video and the other two movies as well. So, as of right now, there are spoilers in both of these videos that I'm referencing. Because, as it turns out, I was correct. My theory was, generally speaking, that Rey was tied to Emperor Palpatine genetically, somehow, in some way. My specific belief, my personal belief, was that Rey was his granddaughter, maybe great-granddaughter, but I hadn't read or seen anything referencing any carnal relationships that Palpatine may have had, though during his political rise in the book Darth Plagueis, he is found on occasion to be flirting with females of one race or another. Through the context of that book, it appears he's merely playing a political game, as he is fairly devoted to learning the ways of the Sith and preparing with his master, Darth Plagueis, to enact the grand plan, and he's using political and social maneuverings to do so. Having said all of that, J.J. Abrams made it fairly clear that previous movies, books, and video games could not be considered canon, so I don't know that we can really use that as any guide to whether Sidious may have had children or not. So, at the time, my theory was a little bit weak on evidence, to be sure. Something about how Rey wielded a lightsaber in The Force Awakens caught my attention, and by the end of the movie, I realized that it was very similar to how Sidious used his lightsaber in Revenge of the Sith. There is some lore regarding lightsaber styles throughout the Star Wars universe. It's always been interesting to me, so I kind of keyed in on that feature. Furthermore, it's one of the most unique styles that we see in all of the movies. There are scenes where sabers are dual-wielded, or they'll have a saber on each end of a staff, or a saber staff. Then you've got Count Dooku's silly bent saber that was supposed to be more aggressive. But aside from Rey and Sidious, there has never been that unique or aggressive of a saber style in the movies. This is literally all I based my theory on, which kind of makes me laugh because I actually suspect that it's purely coincidence. But what if it isn't? What if they intentionally gave Rey's character that tiny detail? Now, I'm not a huge fan of the latest trilogy. I personally think that it contains some very weak and lazy writing. Graphically, it's very good. The acting is generally good, especially Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley. There are some underlying plot points of the story that are actually pretty good. But this isn't about the bad parts of the movie. It's about what might be the most brilliant part of this trilogy. Maybe better than the battle in The Last Jedi where Kylo and Rey work together to take down Snoke. Maybe better than the very compelling struggle that Kylo navigated within himself regarding his past and his tendencies and his desires throughout the trilogy. It might even be better than Kylo's redemption. If Rey's saber style was intentional in The Force Awakens, then I suddenly like these movies a lot more. How can such a small detail mean that much? Let me ask this. Why did she not use that style in the other two movies? At least not as prevalently or in a way that I could notice. See, one critique of The Force Awakens was the fact that Rey was completely untrained and presumably unaware that she had any force sensitivity whatsoever. So here's a person who is clearly force sensitive and powerful enough to not only block Kylo Ren's force persuasion attempts, but counter them, then persuade stormtroopers to let her go and leave their weapons behind, and then best a powerful and trained enemy in a saber duel with no training whatsoever. How could she possibly do that? The answer could be that she's so powerful because she is directly tied genetically to Sidious, which that theory is solidified and proven at the end of Rise of Skywalker. It's not just that she's his granddaughter, but also that his force power was passed down to her, and she has the power, presumably, of all the Sith. Sidious and his master Plagueis before him were arguably the most powerful Sith ever. More so than Exar Kun, or the legendary Darth Bane, or any of those other Jedi that we learn about through games and books and things like that. After all, Plagueis seems to have been able to father a child across the universe by an act of sheer will, or more accurately, subject the Force to his will until it fathered a child. Sidious seems to have the power to cheat death in numerous ways throughout the movies. Whatever offspring Sidious would have had would certainly be extremely powerful conduits of the Force. So Rey's early duel with Kylo was won not by her skills and abilities, but by genetics. She had inherited both the power and the form. Yet she did not use this form in the second and third movies. Why not? The answer undoubtedly is that she had received training from other Jedi by the time she wields a lightsaber in battle again. She was trained first by Luke, then by Leia, both of whom would have had completely different saber forms. Again, the rest of my reading and viewing cannot be considered canon, but it is no stretch of the imagination to determine that the Skywalker saber forms would have been more defensive and less aggressive. Once Rey had actual training, she would start adopting aspects of her master's respective forms as well as developing her own as she learned what worked for her and for her powers. That's the beauty of this small detail. It answers the question of how she could compete with Kylo Ren with no training. It illustrates her connection to Palpatine. It shows her development as a Jedi. And furthermore, and possibly most importantly, this subtle saber style change shows her transformation from being the actual heir to Darth Sidious into the adopted descendant of the Skywalker family, and her journey from dark to light, which actually gives credence to the name Rise of Skywalker in another way besides just her choosing them as her adopted parents. I actually thought that name was quite silly, but now I'm rethinking that. So I have to admit, this would transform the bumpy story that's filled with plot holes and annoyances into a much better epic. And so I'm very, very happy, not because I was right, but because I am choosing to believe that they did this on purpose, and that this subtle style for her to battle Kylo Ren in the first movie and then change to a more traditional style in later movies was a brilliant stroke of genius by the writers of these movies. And that's it. Thank you for watching.